Walk into nearly any modern evangelical church today, and you will find a highly specific timeline for the end of the world. The architecture of this timeline relies entirely on an event known as the secret rapture, a sudden, invisible extraction of believers from the earth, followed immediately by a devastating 7-year tribulation. This framework is so culturally dominant that it feels deeply historical. Yet a thorough examination of church records reveals an uncomfortable paradox. For the first 1,800 years of Christian history, this entire eschatological model was completely absent. The theological giants who built the foundation of Western Christianity never taught it. Augustine, Martin Luther, John Calvin, and John Wesley wrote volumes on biblical prophecy, but none of them ever mentioned a secret pre-tribulation rapture. The doctrine has a strict historical starting point. It was popularized in the 1830s by a Plymouth Brethren preacher named John Nelson Darby. The entirety of Darby's architecture and the multi-billion-dollar left-behind industry it spawned is a modern anomaly, and it hinges entirely on the artificial manipulation of a single Old Testament text, the 70-week prophecy of Daniel 9. Validating the secret rapture requires taking that ancient prophecy, breaking its mathematical sequence, and inserting massive, invisible gaps that the original authors never wrote. To understand the error, we have to look at the math. In Daniel 9, the prophet receives a specific timeline. The text reads, 70 sevens are decreed for your people and your holy city. In classical Hebrew prophetic interpretation, including the formulas established in Numbers 14 and Ezekiel 4, a day in prophetic vision equals 1 literal year. 70 sevens is 490 prophetic days. Therefore, the decree establishes a continuous 490-year countdown for the nation of Israel. The dispensationalist rapture model correctly identifies the start of this countdown. They count the first 69 weeks up to the arrival of Christ. But then, to make the rapture theology work, they physically stop the prophetic clock. They detach the final 70th week, pushing it thousands of years into the future to create their tribulation. This creates a glaring problem. Daniel 9 provides 0 textual indicators of a pause. The gap is a theological invention. The historical Protestant model, known as historicism, rejects this manipulation. It treats the timeline exactly as it is written, continuous, unbroken mathematics. The countdown has a specific historical trigger. Daniel 9:25 says it begins with the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. That verifiable starting point is the decree issued by Persian king Artaxerxes in 457 BC. When we count 483 years forward from 457 BC, adjusting for the transition from BC to AD because there is no year 0, we arrive precisely at AD 27. This matches his baptism. The prophecy then focuses on the final 70th week. Daniel states that in the middle of this final week, the Messiah will put an end to sacrifice, exactly 3.5 years into his ministry. Adding those 3.5 years brings us to the spring of AD 31, when the crucifixion occurred. By his death, the temple veil was torn, and the earthly sacrificial system was permanently finished. The final 3.5 years run their course to AD 34. In that year, Stephen is stoned to death, the early church scatters, and the gospel formally shifts outward to the Gentiles. The full 490 years are complete. The mathematics are historically consistent. Because that final 70th week was fulfilled by Christ 2,000 years ago, there is no detached 7-year block waiting in the future. The foundation for a future 7-year tribulation collapses.
Without a future tribulation, a pre-tribulation extraction loses its logical purpose. But we must still test the primary New Testament verses used to defend a secret disappearance. Rapture believers frequently point to 1 Thessalonians 4:16. The text reads, "For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God." Look closely at the Greek acoustic descriptors. This is arguably the loudest verse in the New Testament. A loud command, a shouting archangel, a divine trumpet blast. Paul is describing a massively public, corporate event. Jesus himself warned against claims of localized or hidden returns. In Matthew 24, he told his disciples not to believe rumors of a secret arrival. Instead, he compared his true return to lightning flashing brilliantly from the east all the way to the west. To build a doctrine around a silent rescue requires actively ignoring the most explosive visual and acoustic language recorded in the New Testament. The cultural weight of the rapture largely rests on a single image from Matthew 24. Jesus states that at his coming, 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other left. Popular theology assumes the individual who is taken is the raptured saint, swept up to heaven while the other is abandoned on a ruined earth. We can test this assumption by reading the sentence immediately preceding it. In verses 37 through 39, Jesus explicitly frames this scenario, comparing it to the days of Noah. He says they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. Apply the critical hermeneutical question. During Noah's flood, who was actually taken away? It was the wicked, swept away by violent destruction. The people who were left behind were Noah and his family. The righteous were left to inherit the cleansed earth. Luke 17 corroborates this exact reading. After Jesus gives this analogy, the disciples specifically ask him, "Where, Lord? Where are these people taken?" Jesus gives a sobering answer. He says, "Where there is a dead body, there the vultures will gather." He links the act of being taken directly to carrion birds and death. A rigorous reading of the text reverses the pop theology narrative. In Christ's analogy, to be taken is to suffer ultimate judgment. Being left behind is the enduring mark of salvation. This debate over visibility and timing eventually hits a deeper theological wall, the nature of the human being. The rapture framework depends on the Greek concept of an immortal soul. Extracting a conscious person while leaving a biological body behind requires a state where the soul is active and independent. Without this dualism, a secret extraction is biologically and biblically impossible. The Seventh-day Adventist historical position addresses this by returning to the doctrine of soul sleep. Relying on texts like Ecclesiastes 9, Ellen G. White maintained that the dead wait unconsciously in the grave until the resurrection. If the dead are sleeping, the rapture's secret phase disappears. There is no conscious soul to extract early. Instead, the timeline demands a single conclusive bodily resurrection for all believers at the visible second coming. This shifts the entire map of the end times. During the ensuing millennium, the earth sits completely desolate, utterly emptied of human life. Satan is bound simply by circumstance, trapped on a ruined planet with no one left to deceive. God's timeline requires no hermeneutical gaps. His return requires no secrecy, and his justice leaves no one living behind for a second chance. Rejecting the 19th century invention of the secret rapture anchors the second coming as the singular, visible climax of human history.